Imagine sitting down for Thanksgiving dinner, but instead of being surrounded by loved ones, you're facing cold prison walls.
Yeah,
That's the reality for John Adrian Velasquez, who also goes by JJ.
right.
He's been locked up for over 2 decades,
Wow.
convicted of murdering a retired police officer, and he has always maintained his innocence.
Hmm.
And you, our listeners, you've sent in his letters and court documents and even podcast interviews asking us to take a deep dive into his case.
This is one that really gets to the heart of so many issues plaguing the justice system.
It really does.
Eyewitness testimony,
Yeah.
police procedures,
Absolutely.
and just human perception and memory.
It all started back in 1998 in a Harlem gambling den.
Okay,
Picture it as smoky air cards being dealt hushed whispers of betting.
I can see it.
And then suddenly, chaos just erupts.
Oh, wow.
A retired cop, Al Ward, is shot dead during a robbery.
Oh, my goodness.
People are scrambling for safety.
Yeah.
The room is in pandemonium.
It's just chaos.
And the pressure on the police to find the killer is immense.
Oh, I bet with a case this high profile,
Absolutely.
they must have felt a real rush to judgment
They did.
to just solidify the narrative and get someone behind bars.
Exactly. And that's where the initial eyewitness descriptions become so crucial.
Right.
Multiple witnesses describe the shooter as a light-skinned black man.
Okay.
A detail that, as we'll see, becomes incredibly significant as JJ's story unfolds.
It just goes to show how these seemingly minor details can just become so important,
Yeah.
especially in criminal investigations when
Yeah.
you're relying on eyewitness accounts,
Yes.
which we know are often unreliable.
Exactly. And now we introduce John Adrian Velasquez, or JJ, into this already chaotic situation.
Okay.
He's a young father out on bail for a drug offense, and suddenly he finds himself accused of this murder.
Wow.
He was adamant that he had never even been to that gambling den, let alone
Right.
committed the crime.
It's hard to imagine
Yeah.
being a young father at home 1 minute
Right.
and then accused of murder the next.
He was so confident in the system,
Oh, wow.
so sure that the truth would prevail, that he actually turned himself in.
He must have really believed that the facts speak for themselves.
He did. But despite his insistence that he'd never been to the crime scene, he's picked out of a lineup.
That's incredible.
It is.
Just makes you question the whole idea of eyewitness testimony.
It does.
I mean, how reliable can it really be,
Right.
especially in a situation like that,
Especially in such a chaotic and stressful situation.
right, where memories are so easily influenced by everything.
Exactly. And then on top of all of that, we have the conflicting evidence.
Okay.
On one hand, you have these eyewitness accounts placing JJ at the scene,
Right.
but on the other hand, JJ claims he has an alibi,
Oh, really?
which we'll explore in much greater detail in the upcoming part.
Well, that's a game changer.
It is.
The mere existence of an alibi
Right.
introduces reasonable doubt.
Absolutely.
It suggests that maybe the prosecution's narrative isn't as airtight as it seems.
And then we have what we're calling the mugshot mystery.
Okay.
I'm intrigued.
Augustus Brown, a heroin dealer who was present during the robbery, picks JJ's photo out of a lineup.
Okay.
Remember, he initially described the shooter as black,
Yeah.
and JJ identifies as Latino.
This doesn't add up.
It doesn't.
I mean, if Brown described the shooter as black, why was JJ's photo even included?
It's a great question, and it raises questions about the thoroughness of the investigation
For sure.
and potential biases.
Did they just focus on JJ prematurely?
It's possible.
Because they felt pressure to solve this high-profile case.
And to make matters even more complicated,
Okay.
there's a glaring lack of physical evidence tying JJ to the scene.
What do you mean?
No DNA, no fingerprints, not even the murder weapon has ever been linked to him.
That's a huge red flag.
It is, especially in a case as serious as murder.
You'd expect more than just eyewitness accounts.
Exactly. And now here's where things take a truly fascinating turn.
Okay.
Derry Daniels, the man who confessed to being JJ's accomplice,
Right?
admitted to the crime and named JJ as his partner.
Okay.
But JJ insists he didn't even know Daniels.
So what was Daniel's motivation then?
That's a great question.
Was his confession even genuine?
We don't know.
Was he coerced or offered some kind of deal?
That's what we need to find out.
We need more context.
We do. And it's interesting because JJ and Daniels are so different.
How so?
I mean, in terms of age and lifestyle.
Okay.
JJ was a young father, just starting out.
Right.
And Daniels was significantly older and heavily involved in the drug scene.
That is quite a difference.
It makes you wonder why these two would be partners in crime.
It just doesn't seem to fit.
It really doesn't.
Like it was overlooked during the trial.
Yeah.
this discrepancy,
Yeah.
it casts doubt on the whole partnership idea.
It's like we're looking at two completely separate narratives.
Yeah.
The official story presented by the prosecution
Right.
and JJ's claims of innocence. And each side paints a very different picture.
And our job is to try to make sense of it all.
Exactly. And that's what this deep dive is really about. It's about the power of perspective.
Okay.
JJ urges everyone to examine the facts themselves.
I like that.
You know, he acknowledges that we all have biases
Of course.
and preconceived notions.
Right.
He's essentially saying, don't just take my word for it.
Right.
Dig deeper. Look at the evidence and see if the official narrative truly holds up.
And that's exactly what we aim to do in this deep dive.
We
We're
do.
going to sift through everything,
Yeah.
challenge the narrative,
Absolutely.
and try to understand how this young man ended up convicted of a crime he says he didn't commit.
And a key piece of that puzzle is his alibi.
Right, the alibi.
It's the detail that he himself has repeatedly emphasized.
And if he can prove he was somewhere else at the time of the murder,
Right.
that could change everything.
It could. So what exactly is this alibi?
Yeah.
And how strong is the evidence supporting it?
We need to get to the bottom of this.
We do. That's what we'll unravel in the next part of our deep dive.
No, wait.
Stay with us, because the story only gets more intriguing from here.
Definitely will. So we left off with a big question mark hanging over JJ's alibi.
We did.
He says he wasn't anywhere near that Harlem gambling den. But if that's true, then where was he?
It's the one thing that JJ keeps coming back to in his letters in that podcast interview. He insists he has proof he was somewhere else.
Mhm.
But so far, the specifics have been a bit of a mystery.
It's the missing piece, isn't it?
Yeah,
We've talked about the iffy eyewitness accounts, and there's no physical evidence.
right.
And his supposed accomplice doesn't seem like they even know each other.
It's true,
So if JJ wasn't at that gambling den, he had to be somewhere else, right?
logically.
But where? And why didn't this alibi clear him during the trial?
It's the million-dollar question.
It is.
If his alibi is so solid, why did the jury convict him?
Hmm.
So let's get into the details. What does JJ actually say he was doing?
Well, according to JJ and his mother, Maria Velasquez, he was at home in the Bronx taking care of his 2 young sons
Okay.
while their mother was out.
So a family alibi.
Yeah.
He's at home with his kids.
It's a pretty different picture from the cold-blooded killer the prosecution's trying to portray.
Right.
On the surface, it seems straightforward.
Yeah. But legally speaking, an alibi needs more than just words.
Okay.
It needs to be corroborated.
Okay.
You need independent verification. You know,
Mm-hmm.
witness statements, time-stamped receipts, phone records, anything that puts him at that location at that time.
So what kind of evidence did JJ actually present?
Yeah, were there any other witnesses?
Mhm.
Did he have any documentation to prove he was there?
Right.
That's where things get a little tricky.
Okay.
From what you've given me, it's not really clear what evidence, if any, was used at the trial. This is something that needs more investigation.
It's a big question mark.
It is.
If he had a solid alibi, why wasn't it enough to sway the jury?
Right. You'd think it would at least create some reasonable doubt.
You would.
It's like a key part of his defense is just missing.
Maybe the evidence wasn't strong enough.
Yeah, that's possible. Maybe the witnesses weren't believable, or their stories didn't quite line up.
Or maybe the prosecution was really good at discrediting his alibi,
Yeah.
making the jury doubt the witnesses or the timeline.
It's possible they just didn't buy it.
Another possibility, and this is a troubling one,
Okay.
is that maybe the alibi was presented, but the jury just didn't give it enough weight.
Hmm.
We know juries can be influenced by all sorts of things,
Yeah,
biases, the way evidence is presented.
absolutely.
It's impossible to remove the human element completely.
It's true. Even with a rock-solid alibi, there's no guarantee a jury will see it as proof.
Right. They're still people with their own thoughts and feelings.
It's why the context of the trial matters.
Yeah.
The atmosphere in the courtroom, even the makeup of the jury.
It all plays a role.
So we don't have all the answers about JJ's alibi yet,
Not yet.
but it's a crucial part of his story.
Definitely.
It's a thread we need to keep pulling to see where it leads.
We need to figure out if it was weak. Or if it was strong and ignored or something else entirely.
It could completely change how we see this whole case.
For sure.
And as we dig deeper, we need to look beyond just the alibi itself.
Oh, okay.
We need to think about why people did what they did.
Yeah, their motivations.
Like, why did Derry Daniels confess and implicate JJ in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
What about those eyewitness accounts? What led them to point the finger at JJ?
Right. Were they pressured? Were there biases at play?
These are all important questions.
They are, and that's where we're headed next.
Okay.
We're going to look at the key players in this story and try to understand what led them to make the decisions they did
Right.
and how those decisions ultimately impacted JJ's fate.
So we've been really digging into the case of John Adrian Velasquez,
Right.
or JJ as we've been calling him,
Right.
a man who has spent over 2 decades in prison for a murder he swears he didn't commit.
And the more we uncover,
Yeah.
the more questions we have,
We do.
the inconsistencies with the eyewitnesses, the lack of physical evidence, the whole alibi situation. It's clear there's more to this story.
Way more complex than it seemed at first.
Yeah, and as we start to look closer at the people involved and their motivations,
Okay.
we find even more layers that challenge the whole case against JJ.
Let's start with Derry Daniels, the man who confessed to being JJ's accomplice in the robbery and murder of Al Ward.
Right.
He's the one who pointed the finger at JJ. But what do we really know about him?
Well, we know he was a lot older than JJ,
Okay.
and he struggled with drug addiction.
Mm.
He was even caught at the scene with drug paraphernalia,
Oh, wow.
which suggests he might have been under the influence during the robbery.
That doesn't make his confession very reliable, does it?
Not necessarily.
If he was high, how can we trust what he said happened?
It's a valid point.
Yeah.
We know false confessions happen,
Right.
sometimes out of fear or desperation or even to protect someone else.
And when you consider his drug addiction,
Yeah.
it's not hard to imagine he might have been desperate to cut a deal with the cops.
To say whatever they wanted to hear just to get a lighter sentence.
So what do we know about how Daniels confessed?
Right. Was there any pressure?
Were there any red flags? Was he coerced or offered leniency?
Well, unfortunately, the stuff you've given me doesn't have those specific details
Okay.
about how his confession was obtained.
Hmm.
But we do know he took a plea deal,
Right.
which means some kind of negotiation probably happened.
It's an important point.
It is
Plea deals can be really useful sometimes.
to move things along faster.
All right. To save time and resources.
Exactly.
But they can also be used to secure convictions, even if the evidence is shaky.
It's a double-edged sword for sure.
So now let's talk about the eyewitnesses who ID'd JJ as the shooter.
Right.
We've already touched on how unreliable eyewitness testimony can be, especially in stressful situations.
Especially when there's a lot going on.
But what about these specific witnesses?
Yeah, what were their motivations?
Why did they pick JJ out of the lineup?
Well, from what we know, they were all at the gambling den during the robbery. Right.
And they all described the shooter as a light-skinned black man.
But that doesn't really match JJ's appearance.
It does.
He identifies as Latino,
Right.
and while he could be considered light-skinned, it's unlikely he'd be mistaken for black.
So how do we explain that?
It really makes you question those identifications.
Yeah.
Were they confused because of the chaos?
Maybe.
Did they feel pressured to pick someone just to help the police?
It's possible.
We also need to look at whether their descriptions were even consistent.
Right?
Did they all give the same level of detail about the shooter?
Were there any differences that might show they weren't really sure?
Again, we don't have all the specifics from their testimonies.
Right.
But the fact that they all ended up IDing JJ, despite that initial different description,
Mm-hmm.
really raises questions about the whole identification process.
It makes you wonder if the lineup was even done fairly.
Exactly, were the photos presented in a neutral way?
Did the witnesses get the right instructions?
Was there any chance of accidental suggestion? Or even coercion?
Without knowing those answers,
Yeah.
it's hard to say how much weight those eyewitness IDs should really carry.
We've uncovered a lot of inconsistencies
We have.
and raised a lot of questions.
So where does it all leave us?
Well, I think we can safely say there are enough red flags here
For sure.
to warrant a much closer look at JJ's case.
Yeah.
The lack of physical evidence, the questionable confession from Daniels,
Right.
the inconsistencies from the eyewitnesses,
It all adds up to a lot of doubt.
and don't forget about the alibi mystery.
Right.
If JJ can actually prove he was somewhere else when the murder happened,
Yeah.
that could completely change everything.
But even if he can't,
Yeah.
the number of unanswered questions and inconsistencies should be enough to make anyone stop and think.
This case is a perfect example of just how complicated the justice system can be.
It really is.
It shows how easily our memories can be tricked.
Yeah.
And how bias can sneak into investigations and trials.
And how innocent people can end up being convicted.
We hope this deep dive has shown just how important it is to think critically.
To question what we're told and demand accountability from our justice system.
JJ's story is a powerful reminder that the fight for justice never really ends.
It's a process that demands our attention.
And our willingness to challenge assumptions and keep searching for the truth, no matter what.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.